Have you ever wondered why someone could leave such a deep imprint on your soul, even when they weren't right for you? Why the connection felt cosmic, fated, almost as if you had known them in another life? Why their presence felt like coming home, but their absence felt like falling apart? What if I told you it wasn't them you were drawn to? It was you. Or rather, it was the part of you you had abandoned a long time ago. The part that still whispers through old wounds, that longs to be seen but is terrified of being exposed, that aches for connection but only knows how to reach through pain. This isn't about love, not in the way you were taught to understand it. This is about mirrors, psychological mirrors, emotional reflections, people who appear in your life not to complete you but to reveal you. Carl Jung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But what he didn't say outright, at least not in those exact words, is that sometimes what transforms you also breaks you, and it needs to, because without that rupture you wouldn't look inward, you wouldn't wake up, you'd keep reaching for illusions, mistaking recognition for love. So let's get honest. The person who shattered you was never your savior. They were your mirror. And the pain they caused you? That was just your own reflection cutting too deep. You see, the human psyche is not built for comfort. It's built for completion. And until you become whole, until you make peace with your unconscious, you will continue attracting the same face in different bodies. You'll keep calling it chemistry, fate, even love. But what you're really feeling is familiarity. That ache in your chest wasn't passion, it was a memory, a wound reawakened, an echo of something unresolved in you, screaming for your attention. That's what drew you to them. Not their soul, not their heart, but their ability to touch your brokenness in just the right way. We don't fall in love with people, we fall in love with what people reflect back to us. And when we're unaware, and when we haven't done the inner work, what we project is our emptiness, our need for validation, our fear of being alone, our suppressed desire to feel real. And that's what you saw in them, your mirror. And it felt like love, because it was familiar pain. Pain you knew how to dance with, pain you learned in childhood. Maybe it was the emotional absence of a parent. Maybe it was the need to earn affection by abandoning yourself. Maybe it was the belief that love always hurts, but at least hurt means you feel something. So when someone comes along and triggers all those dormant stories, it doesn't feel wrong, it feels alive. But that's not love. That's a wound calling itself destiny. And it's not your fault. You were never taught the difference between recognition and connection, between psychological projection and true intimacy. You thought what you were feeling was a rare bond, when it was actually the resurfacing of a pattern so old it felt eternal. You didn't fall in love with them. You fell in love with the version of yourself that you hoped they would finally make feel whole. But no one can complete you, because the hole you feel, that's the space where your shadow lives. The shadow, as Jung described it, is the part of the self we repress, deny, or ignore. The emotions we weren't allowed to feel, the desires we were shamed for, the power we were taught to fear. And until we make that shadow conscious, it doesn't disappear. It chooses our partners for us. This is how projection works. You see what you haven't yet faced. You meet someone who carries your unlived energy. If you abandon your voice, you might be drawn to someone outspoken. If you buried your rage, you may crave someone who expresses it freely. If you never learn to love yourself, you may become addicted to those who withhold it, just so you can earn it. And the tragedy? It feels like love because it mirrors the emotional language you learned from pain. That's why you stayed, even when it hurt. That's why you kept hoping they'd change, even when they showed you who they were. That's why you confused attention for devotion and chaos for passion. You were trying to resolve the past through the present. You were looking for healing in someone who was only meant to reveal the wound. But here's the twist. that wound wasn't created by them. It was already there, they just pressed on it. And you thought they broke you, but they didn't. They exposed you. That exposure was sacred. Because in that moment of heartbreak, when your illusions shattered and your identity dissolved, something awakened in you. Something ancient, something real. A voice you hadn't heard in years. The part of you that remembers who you were before you started chasing love through suffering. Before you learned to mistake survival for intimacy. This isn't about blame. This isn't about making them the villain. It's about reclaiming your projection, because the moment you stop seeing them as the cause of your pain is the moment you start seeing them as the mirror of it. And when that shift happens, you stop chasing. You start integrating. You realize it was never about fixing the relationship. It was about discovering the relationship you've been avoiding, your relationship with yourself. You can't find real love until you stop abandoning yourself for the illusion of it. You can't feel chosen until you choose your own voice over your fear of rejection. You can't experience intimacy until you stop negotiating your worth just to feel needed. You have to stop calling it love when it's really your shadow begging to be seen. And that journey begins with heartbreak, because heartbreak is the only thing strong enough to crack the walls you built around your truth. And your truth is this: it wasn't about them. It was about what they stirred in you. You weren't drawn to their presence, you were drawn to your own absence. And now that you've seen that, you can never go back. So now you're standing in the ruins of what you thought was love. Maybe you're still hoping they'll come back. Maybe you're scrolling through old messages, replaying conversations, wondering what you could have done differently. Maybe you're stuck in that loop, the one where you convince yourself it was real because it felt real. But feelings, powerful as they are, don't always point to truth. Sometimes they point to trauma. And the deeper the trauma, the stronger the feeling when someone touches it. This is what Jung meant when he said, "What you resist persists." The more you try to find love in others without facing your inner void, the more you'll keep attracting people who amplify it. They're not here to love you the way you want. They're here to reveal why you don't love yourself the way you deserve. Let that sink in. Every time you felt ignored, you were ignoring your own needs. Every time you felt unworthy, you were denying your own voice. Every time you begged for closeness, it was because you were miles away from your own heart. And this is why it hurts so much. Not because they left, but because their presence made you feel like you finally mattered. And when that disappears, you're not just grieving a person, you're grieving access to a version of yourself that you only knew when you were with them. But here's the truth no one tells you. That version of you was never theirs to awaken. It was always yours. You just didn't know how to meet it on your own. So you projected it onto them, made them the container for your unlived light. And when they left, it felt like they took it with them. But they didn't. It's still there, waiting. Right beneath the surface, underneath the fear, the ache, the longing. That's why this pain is sacred, because it points you inward. Not to fix, not to numb, but to see, really see the parts of yourself you thought had died. Jung didn't just talk about the shadow to scare people, he talked about it because it holds the key to wholeness. The shadow isn't evil, it's repressed. And repression always creates distortion, especially in love. You chase people who reject you because you rejected yourself first. You silence your truth to stay connected because you've been taught that being chosen means being silent. You confuse suffering with passion because emotional chaos was your first language. But now, you're waking up. Now you're starting to see it wasn't love, it was your mirror. They were showing you the love you didn't give yourself, the boundaries you never set, the parts of you that were still willing to abandon your soul for a scrap of attention. And yes, that realization stings. It burns, it feels like betrayal, because it is. But not their betrayal, your own. Because you knew, deep down you always knew, The tight stomach, the racing thoughts, the voice that whispered, "This isn't it." But you stayed. Not because you're weak, because you were looking for healing in a person who only knew how to hold your wound. It's time to stop calling that healing. It's time to stop making pain your compass. You are not a broken thing waiting to be fixed by love. You are a whole being learning to reclaim the parts of yourself you exiled just to survive. And that reclamation doesn't happen through fantasy. It happens through grief. It happens the moment you stop romanticizing the bond and start examining the bruise. When you stop asking, "Why didn't they choose me?" and start asking, "Why did I need them to?" When you stop waiting for closure and start creating clarity, that's when the shift begins. You stop chasing their return and start reclaiming your energy. You stop hoping for an apology and start forgiving yourself. You stop praying for the past to rewrite itself and start writing a new script. One where you don't shrink for love. One where you don't bleed for connection. Because let's be real, the love you thought you had was just a reflection of your ache to be seen. And now that you see that, you're not going to unsee it. You're going to transform it. Because the shadow, once made conscious, doesn't rule you anymore. It joins you. It strengthens you, it becomes part of your power. And now you have a choice. You can either keep seeking people who reflect your wounds, or you can become the mirror of your own healing. That's what individuation means. Not perfection, not spiritual bypassing, but radical honesty. You meet your shadow and say, "I see you." You stop editing yourself for connection. You stop outsourcing your wholeness. You become the one you've been searching for. And that's when love becomes real. Not because you finally found the right person, but because you finally found your whole self and refused to abandon it again. Real love doesn't demand that you disappear. It doesn't ask you to shapeshift into someone more palatable, more agreeable, more easy to love. That's the illusion you were sold, that being lovable means being less of yourself, that you must earn your place in someone's life by sacrificing the very parts of you that make you whole. But the truth is, anything that requires you to abandon yourself isn't love, it's a transaction rooted in fear, and fear is a master illusionist. It dresses up in promises, it masquerades as chemistry. It tells you that losing yourself is worth it if someone else will finally hold you. But here's the thing, being held while you're disappearing isn't safety. It's erasure with a smile. You've done that before, haven't you? You've said yes when your entire body screamed no. You've stayed silent when your truth could have shattered the illusion. You've bent, twisted, minimized just to avoid being too much, too needy, too intense. But all that contortion did was disconnect you from your core. And every time you disappeared for someone else's comfort, you deepened your own loneliness. That loneliness wasn't caused by them, it was the echo of your own self-abandonment. Carl Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we wear to navigate society, but he warned that when we become too identified with it, we forget who we are underneath. We mistake performance for presence. And the more we perform, the more invisible we become to ourselves. You don't just lose yourself in a relationship, you lose yourself in the pattern, the cycle of chasing, pleasing, performing, trying to prove that you're lovable enough to be chosen. But here's a brutal truth. You were taught to trade authenticity for attachment. From a young age, you learned which parts of you were welcome and which were punished. You learned to edit yourself in real time, to suppress your needs, to filter your feelings. And then you grew up wondering why you feel hollow, even when someone says they love you. It's because they're loving the mask, not you. And no matter how tightly someone holds your mask, it will never make your soul feel safe. Because deep down, you know the difference between being seen and being used. That's the ache that always returns. Not just heartbreak, but the haunting realization that you've built connections on your absence instead of your truth. And this is where the work begins. Not by blaming the other, but by asking yourself, where did I leave myself? That question is your doorway to power, because the moment you turn inward, not to fix yourself, but to reclaim yourself, you start unraveling the lie that love must hurt to be real. You stop romanticizing dysfunction. You stop calling chaos passion. You start recognizing how much of your love story was actually a story about survival, about trying to earn what should have been unconditional. And once you see that clearly, everything changes. You no longer chase ghosts. You no longer confuse being needed with being loved. You stop trying to heal through the same dynamic that wounded you. That's the essence of shadow work. Not just seeing your darkness, but seeing how it plays out in the people you choose, the pain you tolerate, the silence you keep. The people who hurt you the most weren't always malicious. Often they were just mirrors of the parts of yourself you've yet to embrace. They triggered your abandonment because you haven't yet come home to yourself. They activated your rage because you've never felt safe expressing it. They mirrored your unworthiness because you've carried that belief like a second skin. And they were never meant to complete you. They were meant to show you where you still feel incomplete. This is why healing doesn't begin with finding the right person. It begins with refusing to abandon yourself for another minute. It begins with standing in front of your own reflection and saying, "I will not run from you anymore." And the beauty of this is, once you stop running, you stop projecting. You stop needing others to rescue you from your inner void. You stop expecting someone to give you what you haven't yet given yourself. Acceptance, presence, wholeness. And when that happens, you change the entire energetic pattern of your relationships. You stop attracting people who thrive on your silence. You stop drawing in those who feed off your wounds. You start magnetizing those who resonate with your truth, and not because you're performing, but because your wholeness is no longer negotiable. This is the spiritual power of heartbreak. It destroys the illusions that keep you small. It peels away the fantasy. It reveals every place you've made someone else the source of your self-worth. And that pain? It's not punishment. It's initiation. An invitation to reclaim what you gave away without realizing it. Your boundaries, your needs, your voice, your magic. You thought the relationship was the thing, but the real relationship is the one you have with yourself. You thought they were the answer, but they were the question that led you back to your own heart. That's why heartbreak is holy, because it cracks open the false self and lets the real one breathe again. And now you get to choose. You get to stop performing and start existing. You get to stop begging for love and start embodying it. You get to be the person you've been waiting for. That's not just healing, that's liberation. And no one can take that away from you. Liberation doesn't come with a grand ceremony. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks or applause. It happens quietly. In the stillness, in those invisible choices you start making differently, when you pause before responding to that text, when you stop justifying your boundaries, when you notice the old pattern rising, and this time you don't follow it. That's how healing moves, not in giant leaps, but in sacred refusals. Refusals to betray yourself, refusals to shrink, refusals to chase ghosts who never knew how to hold your soul. And it's not easy. The pull to return is strong, because the pattern is seductive. It knows your name. It speaks in the voice of longing, dressed in the illusion of love. It will tell you that going back is comfort, that reaching out is closure, that maybe, just maybe, this time will be different. But it won't. Not until you're different. Not until you stop seeking safety in places where your spirit has only ever been silenced. And this is where individuation truly begins. Carl Jung called individuation the process of becoming who you truly are, not who the world taught you to be, not who your past shaped you into, but who you were always meant to remember. It's not about perfection. It's not about becoming some untouchable force of logic. It's about wholeness, reintegrating the shadow, reclaiming the golden parts of you that you've buried under shame, fear, and self-doubt. It's about facing the mirror and not looking away this time, because here's the paradox: the more you face yourself, the less you seek yourself in others. And that's the moment your relationships begin to change, not because you find better people, but because you've stopped projecting your unconscious needs onto everyone you meet. You no longer confuse intensity with intimacy. You no longer hand over your power to those who mirror your emptiness. You begin to choose from presence, not pain. And that's what makes you unshakable. Because when you finally see your own worth, you stop bargaining for scraps. You stop twisting yourself into a version of who they might love. You become the version that loves herself, fully, unapologetically, without condition. And from that place, love becomes possible. Real love, not performance, not projection, not possession, but presence. Two whole beings, choosing each other from a place of overflow, not lack. But you can't arrive there until you first walk through the illusion, until you feel every echo of the past rise up inside you and choose not to run from it anymore. This is the real work, not moving on, but moving into yourself, into the discomfort, into the emotional architecture of your past, and asking, gently but honestly, what part of me was I hoping they would fix? Because when you find the answer to that, you've found the root. And when you heal the root, the pattern has nothing left to feed on. That's the medicine. And yes, it's uncomfortable, it's lonely sometimes, there are nights when the silence will feel louder than the chaos ever did, but you'll survive it. In fact, you'll find yourself in it, because now you're not avoiding the mirror, you're becoming it. You're holding your own gaze, steady and strong, even when it shakes. And that's the beginning of real freedom. It's not the absence of longing, it's the presence of truth. It's not that you'll never ache again, it's that your ache won't own you. It won't drive your choices, your relationships, your self-worth. It will just be what it is, a human experience, not a compass. You were never meant to be ruled by your wounds. You were meant to be revealed through them. And now that you know the difference, the path ahead is yours to walk. Not in search of another half, but in celebration of your wholeness. You're not too much. You're not too broken. You're just waking up. And waking up is messy, but it's also miraculous, because now you get to rebuild, not from desperation, but from devotion. Devotion to the truth of who you are, to the fire that never went out, even when you tried to smother it with someone else's approval, to the sacred knowing that your love is not a bargaining chip, it's a birthright, and anyone who makes you question that is not your mirror anymore. They're your past. And you don't live there now, you live here, in the present, in the power of your own awareness, in the clarity that comes when you finally stop asking, why didn't they love me? And start asking, why did I forget to love myself? That question will change everything. And once you start living the answer, you won't need closure. You'll be the closure. Not because you got revenge or validation or some perfect ending, but because you chose yourself and meant it. That's what makes you whole. That's what makes you free. Would you like me to continue with the next 1,000 words? Freedom doesn't come in the form of forgetting them. It comes in the form of remembering you, the real you, the one that existed before the performance, before the ache, before the mask, the one who felt deeply, questioned everything, longed for truth, and craved a kind of love that didn't require disappearing to be kept. That version of you is still alive, still waiting, still whole even underneath the layers of heartbreak and projection and false intimacy you called connection. You're not healing to become someone new. You're healing to remember who you were before you were taught to believe you were unworthy. And that remembering, it's slow, tender, sometimes painful, because with every piece you recover, you have to grieve the version of you who thought they had to give it away to be loved. You have to mourn the times you stayed silent just to be accepted. You have to forgive yourself for all the ways you abandoned your own needs because you were afraid they made you unlovable. You have to make peace with the part of you that confused availability with value, obedience with safety, and love with being chosen. But being chosen means nothing if you had to disappear to receive it. And this is where the deeper layers of shadow work begin, when you stop looking at the person who hurt you and start looking at the part of you that believed you deserved it. That's not victim blaming, that's power reclamation, because when you finally realize that you were complicit in your own erasure, not because you were flawed, but because you were conditioned, you gain the ability to break the cycle. This is what Jung meant when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." You called it fate, didn't you? You thought this person was your destiny, your missing piece, your soulmate. But in truth, they were your mirror, a perfect reflection of everything you'd yet to heal, every need you denied, every wound you buried, every emotion you swallowed. And that's why it felt magnetic, because on a subconscious level it was familiar. Not because it was right, but because it echoed the pain you never got to resolve, the same way you felt growing up when love had to be earned, when you had to be good to be seen, when your needs were too much, so you made yourself less. That's what came alive in this relationship, not your wholeness, your original wound. And here's the moment of liberation. When you realize that what felt like love was really just your own absence echoing back at you. You didn't want them. You wanted the version of you that you believed would finally be loved through their eyes. But that's not love. That's a spiritual craving for self-recognition. That's why they didn't have to say much. Why their silence was louder than words. Why their presence felt addictive. You were high on your own projection. You weren't in love with who they were. You were in love with the parts of you they temporarily gave you permission to feel. And then they withdrew, or disappointed you, or showed you they couldn't hold what you were hoping they'd heal, and you called it betrayal. But it was a rescue. Not from them, from the illusion. Because had they stayed, you might have kept outsourcing your worth to someone who only ever saw a reflection of their own shadow in you. Had they loved you in the way you begged for, you might never have looked in the mirror. You might never have asked the questions that cracked you open. And sometimes heartbreak is the only thing strong enough to shake you awake. Not because you needed to suffer, but because you needed to see. And now you do. You see how much of your love was given from emptiness, not abundance. You see how often you performed instead of connected. You see how the ache you carried was never really about them. It was about you, waiting for you. This is the turning point. The moment when you stop asking why they couldn't love you and start asking why you ever thought you had to earn it. This is the work, not to get over them, but to get under the story. The story that told you love is something you chase, that intimacy must be bought through suffering, that your value is measured by how much you can endure, that you're more desirable when you're less vocal. Less messy, less human. That story was never yours. It was given to you by a world that fears whole people. A world that praises self-sacrifice and calls it strength. A world that teaches women to be pretty and pleasing and men to be invulnerable and stoic. A world that molds personas and punishes authenticity. That world is dying. And your heartbreak is part of its funeral, because you're no longer willing to call pain love. You're no longer mistaking being needed for being valued. You're no longer sacrificing your soul just to feel chosen. And that's terrifying to some. To those who only knew how to love you when you were silent, who only stayed as long as you stayed small, who only reached for you when they sensed you slipping away. Let them go. Let them project. Let them blame. Let them call you difficult or too much or cold. You're not here to be understood by those still committed to misunderstanding themselves. You're here to become real, to stop performing, to stop shrinking, to stop betraying your own truth for a temporary fix of false affection. And you're doing it. Every tear, every boundary, every moment of grief is part of your reclamation. You're not healing to become lovable. You're healing because you finally remember that you already are. And now the mirror is clear. You don't see them anymore. You see you, and you're staying. That's what changes everything. You're staying, not out of fear, not out of guilt, not because someone else needs you to hold it all together. You're staying because you finally see that the most important relationship you will ever have is the one you build with yourself. Not the version of you that people liked, not the version that kept the peace, but the one who feels, who knows, who aches, who sees through the masks. That's the version that survived. The one who was buried under all the noise, waiting to be remembered. And now she's rising. He's rising, not perfect, not healed all at once, but real, present, awake, and maybe you're still afraid. That's okay. Fear doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're walking a path your old self would have never dared to take. It means you're breaking generational patterns, personal cycles, ancestral trauma. It means you're becoming someone who no longer abandons themselves just to be tolerated. That's not small work. And as you walk this path, you'll start to notice something. The ache that once ruled you will soften. The craving that once dictated your worth will lose its grip. The silence that once terrified you will become sacred. Because you're no longer filling the void with someone else's presence. You're learning how to be with yourself. Not in isolation, not in punishment, but in reverence. This is the moment where love transforms. Not romantic love, not fairy tale love, but self-love. Integrated love. The kind of love that doesn't demand performance, but presence. The kind that doesn't ask for perfection, but honesty. The kind that doesn't fear your depth, but bows to it. You will still crave connection. That's human. But now, you'll crave it from a place of fullness. You'll no longer confuse being seen with being saved. You'll no longer silence yourself just to keep someone else comfortable. You'll stop mistaking adrenaline for attachment. And yes, that means fewer people will fit. The crowd will thin. Not everyone will meet you in your fullness. But that's not a loss. That's a refinement. You're no longer looking for mirrors that reflect your wounds. You're seeking ones that reflect your wholeness. And in that shift, you'll experience a different kind of love. One that doesn't ask you to beg. One that doesn't trigger your trauma and call it fate. One that feels like breathing, not performing. But you won't need it to complete you, because you're already complete. You've faced the mirror, you've owned your projections, you've stopped chasing ghosts, you've chosen to stay with yourself, for yourself. And that's the revolution. That's the part they don't tell you about healing. It makes you dangerous. Not in a violent way, but in the way your presence no longer bends to dysfunction. In the way you don't tolerate the things you once called normal. In the way you stop begging for crumbs and start building tables. In the way your very existence confronts people who still live asleep. That's why they might resist you now, because mirrors that reflect truth are often unwelcome in rooms built on illusion. But let them call you too much. Let them say you've changed. Because you have. You've come home to yourself. And there is no greater power than that. So, if you're in the aftermath of that kind of love, the kind that broke you open just to show you where you'd gone missing, know this. It wasn't a failure, it was a mirror. A sacred, brutal, necessary mirror. And now, you're free. Not because they chose you, but because you chose yourself. Because you stopped making love something you survive and started making it something you embody. because you stopped calling your abandonment destiny and started calling it what it really was, a reflection of what you hadn't yet healed. And now the story is yours to write. A story where love doesn't mean erasure, where connection doesn't cost your voice, where intimacy doesn't require you to bleed. A story where you don't fall into love, you rise with it. Because love, real love, begins where self-abandonment ends, and you've ended it. The cycle, the chasing, the forgetting. You've come back. And that, right there, is everything you were always looking for.